Hey everybody, I'm Uncle Nay, and today I'm going to be talking to you about bees. But wait a second, I think I know somebody watching this video. Is that? Is that Levi? Hey Levi, how's it going? Well, let's get started. So, what are bees? Well, bees are just like any other insect, like a ladybug, or a dragonfly, or even ants, and even butterflies. They are all insects. But one thing that bees do a little bit differently than some other insects is that they can pollinate flowers and they can basically make honey. But we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But there are a lot of different kinds of bees. So this picture right here is of a honeybee. And not all bees look exactly the same. Here's a picture of another bee, and this one's really cool because it's shiny and green, and this one they actually call a sweat bee. Does anybody know why they would call this bee a sweat bee? Well, it's actually kind of weird and it's kind of nasty, but these bees in the summertime, when you're out walking around and you have sweat on your arms, they'll actually fly, land on your arm, and start licking up the sweat because they really like the salt. That's why they're called sweat bees. But if a sweat bee ever lands on your arm, don't be scared. They'll just lick up the sweat and then they'll fly away. They'll never sting you. Here's another type of bee. Does anybody have a guess of what this type of bee is called? Yup, you were right. This is a bumblebee. And they're really, really fuzzy. They have lots of hair on their bodies. Well, why are bees so important? Well, one of the things that bees do is that they can pollinate flowers. And what pollination is basically when a bee or another type of insect visits a flower and picks up pollen and nectar from that flower, and it moves that pollen to another flower, and then a fruit will grow. A fruit or vegetable will grow from that flower. So if you've ever eaten tomatoes or peas or avocado, watermelon, zucchini, all of these actually need an insect, just like a bee, to take pollen from one flower to another flower to produce that fruit or vegetable. So they're really, really important. If we didn't have any bees, if there were no bees around, we wouldn't have any of these fruits or vegetables to eat. And that would be a bad thing. So when a plant grows big and strong and tall, it produces these flowers. And the flowers will bloom and they'll look really, really pretty. And bees love pretty flowers. They're attracted to them. And what they do is once they land on the flower, they roll all around in that flower and they pick up these tiny, tiny little pollen grains. And that's what's all over this bee's body. But a bee doesn't just visit flowers to pick up pollen. What's another thing that a bee might be trying to eat that a flower produces? If you said honey or nectar, you're right. A flower produces basically like sugar water, and it will stick its tongue into the flower and lap up the sugar water because that's what they like. That's what they like to eat. But they also can turn that nectar that they take from flowers, and they'll turn it into honey. So that's why bees are really, really important for not only for fruits and vegetable plants to grow big and produce fruit and vegetables, but they also produce honey that we like to eat ourselves. So the main way that a fruit or vegetable is produced, like I said a little bit earlier ago, is pollen from one flower has to get moved to another flower. But, if we're talking about a tomato plant, a tomato plant produces these flowers. They grow flowers, and the pollen has to get from one flower to another. But I've never actually seen a tomato plant that had legs and it can just walk up to the other tomato plant and say, "Hey, can I borrow some of your pollen? I need to grow a tomato." I've never seen that before, and I don't know if any of you guys have either. That would be kind of crazy and maybe a little scary too. But one way that tomato plants have figured out how to get pollen from one flower to the next is they call their insect friends, whether it's a butterfly or a bee, and they say, "Hey, Mr. Bee or Butterfly, or Mrs. Bee or Butterfly, can you please come over here and take some of this pollen and bring it to my other friend over there, my other tomato plant friend?" And the bee or butterfly says, "Yeah, sure, but what do I get out of it?" And the flower says, "Well, I'll give you some nectar if you can take this pollen over there." And that's exactly what happens. The flowers produce nectar, and that actually feeds the bees and butterflies and other insects. And at the same time, they get their pollen moved from one flower to the next. And then what happens when that pollen reaches that other flower? Do you remember? Yep, it will produce a fruit or a vegetable. So in the case of a tomato flower, it will produce, or it will grow, a big, tasty, juicy tomato. And there's one type of person who actually works with bees. Does anybody know what their name is? Yep, they are called a beekeeper. And what they do is they basically create a home for honeybees. And when the honeybee goes out and leaves their home or leaves their colony, they will go to all of those flowers and they'll move the pollen around from flower to flower, but they're also picking up all that nectar. And they bring all that nectar back to the colony and they produce, or they make, honey. And what the beekeeper does is he makes sure, or she makes sure, that all the bees are all safe and that they're healthy. And he takes a little bit of that honey from them so that he could bring it to you so you can eat it. But a question is, what is that thing that beekeeper is wearing on his head? That is called a veil. And does anybody know why a beekeeper would be wanting to wear one of those? If you guessed honeybees sting, you are right. So honeybee keepers, they actually wear protective equipment such as a veil so that they don't get stung. And another thing that beekeepers use to protect themselves and keep the bees calm is this smoker. So a beekeeper may take leaves or paper and light it on fire and put it inside the smoker, and it puffs smoke at the bees, and the bees calm down, and they won't sting you if you do that. So if you've ever seen one of these honeybee boxes or honeybee hives, you know probably to stay away, because those honeybees will sting you because they're protecting their home. But if you're a beekeeper, you know how to do this safely. So beekeepers, they also can wear these big suits so that the honeybees don't sting them. But once you open up a hive or a honeybee home, you can see that there's these boards that are running across the inside of the hive. And those boards are where the honeybees live. So if you took one of those boards out of the hive, you would see all the different honeybees that are living in there. And in one of those boxes, one of those honeybee hives, there can be up to 10,000 bees that are living inside that home. So there are a lot of bees and there's a lot of honey. But inside one hive, there are actually three different kinds of bees. There is the queen, and she's really, really big. She is the biggest bee in that hive, and there will be only one of her. And what beekeepers like to do is they actually take a little bit of paint and they put it on her back. That way you can see her, because remember, there are 10,000 bees in that colony or in their home, and it's really hard to find her sometimes. The next kind of bee that you can find in one of their homes, in their hive, is a drone. And these are the boy bees. They're pretty big. They're not as big as the queen. And they have these big, big eyes. So that's one way that you can tell the difference between a queen and the drone, is that the drone has big eyes and the queen doesn't. But overall, the queen is really big compared to the drone. Then the last kind of bee, and the most common, these are the workers. There are most of the bees that are in their hive, they are workers, and these are the girl bees. The one thing that workers have in common with the queen is that they are both girls, but the worker is much smaller than the queen, and she has a stinger. The worker are the ones that can sting you. So let's take a look at this video right here. Let's let it go one more time. What bee is right here in the center? And what did she have on her back? If you guessed that that is the queen, you're right. She is bigger than the other bees that are around her. And remember, the queen has the paint on her back. So that's one way to tell the difference. So next, we're actually going to go out to one of my own honeybee colonies, and I'm going to open it up for you. We'll put some smoke onto the colony to calm the bees down, and then we'll look at those different frames, the different boards that the bees live in, and we're going to try and find the queen. We're going to try and find the drones, which are the boys, and then we're going to try and find some of the workers. I'll catch you guys later. Bye.